pleasure to be here with my colleague and great friend, Dr. William Lawrence.
Good morning, all. Always a pleasure.
Okay, so, William, we're talking about strategies for leadership in an environment which one could characterize as the digital economy. And I use the term a little bit loosely, but the truth is that the majority of today's interactions between business and consumers, businesses and the public sector, consumers to consumers, the vast majority of those interactions, whether they're social, commercial, economic, are in fact digital.
You're certainly right, Maurice. It's difficult to extract digital as a standalone from the other areas, and the work we've done, which we'll share with you, reinforces that point.
Right. And so, you know, the idea of digital transformation, the idea of going digital, the idea of digital first has become almost the flavor of the month. In fact, you hear a lot of organizations, I won't say parroting that, but it's an integral part of today's narrative for business.
You're certainly right. And if you look at the way digital has evolved, which we'll get to, it supports the point that the narrative is, in fact, getting a lot stronger.
Right. And out of this has emerged both through and post-COVID pandemic, when, in a sense, many organizations were forced online, not discretionary, but you didn't have a choice, right? So we're now at a place where one has to exercise strategic choice around digital, and we can step back and look at it in a more strategic way. So it's important that we reset.
Certainly, and especially for this audience, it's very important that it's done from the top down, and then bottom up.
Right. So let's start with what we really mean by digital transformation, so that it's not just a term that we use loosely. All right, so let me start with this, just to make sure that we're on the same page. Digital transformation broadly refers to the use of digital technologies. We're familiar with these combinations of information, computing, communication and connectivity technologies to fundamentally, that's important, digital transformation is transformation. So to fundamentally change the way societies, governments, businesses and citizens operate in such a way that seeks to improve the performance of these entities. So the other thing I would want you to take away from this, that this is not just a business play. Digital transformation has to impact all of society, our governments, businesses such as yourself, and individual citizens. Because if you're going digital and citizens are still stuck in an analog world, then where are the consumers for your digital channels? So it's very important that we think of digital transformation in this very holistic. So William, let's take us through a little bit of an evolutionary perspective.
You know, just to support what Maurice has just said, the way digital has evolved in Jamaica has virtually included all of society. We know that our foray into digital can be traced back to the late 1990s, led by the government of Jamaica. And fortunately, all successive governments have put digital as top priority. So what we have seen is that this government-led initiative has pervaded all of society, and companies have been quite eager to embrace the strategies as they become available. So right now, when you look at the companies in the country, they're all using some type of digital, although at varying stages. And we've got to the point where many companies have actually called out specific technologies for special focus. For example, a number of companies are in fact developing AI policies separate and apart from the overall digital agendas that they have. Many companies, as you all know, use the balanced scorecard system to develop strategy. Moving from learning and growth, where the hope is to generate innovative insights that are driving productivity improvements, delighting customers with goods and services, and of course, financial success. And what companies do, they infuse digital technologies in their strategies with differing results. You know, Maurice, what we're seeing, as you know from the data, is that the results are indeed quite mixed, because the idea of digital transformation is not merely crawling along as a caterpillar, but flying like a butterfly. And what we're seeing is that many companies have become bigger caterpillars and not transformed. And when we speak to several CEOs, Maurice, they're saying that in many cases that the technologies they're aware can be disruptive, so they have to be cautious.
Indeed, and moving from that evolutionary perspective, when we get into the digital world as it is today, and I always like to use this slide because it's an interesting one that captures some key elements here. And not sure if you can see from where you are what's up here, but it tells three important stories. Just to follow on William's sort of evolution. One is that digital transformation today, we're talking about a set of disruptive technologies that characterize as SMAC. If you don't remember anything else after today's session, just keep SMAC in mind: social, mobile, analytics, and cloud. So the disruptive technologies that are driving much of what is happening are obviously the internet, this bundle of disruptive digital technologies here, and of course that light coming down the tunnel is artificial intelligence, right? And it may be an opportunity, maybe a threat, based on some of the decisions and choices that you make as leaders. And the other important thing on this is that we're looking at digital transformational impact across all aspects of society. And we've mentioned it, but it bears repeating. So even as business, when you focus on using digital for improved customer experience, improved efficiency, adapting your business models, you always have to bear in mind the context. Is the state providing sufficient infrastructure to enable digitization? Talking about things like ID, payments, open data, and of course, are my consumers, are they ready to engage these channels, right? So as a business, you have to think of all three impacts. Last point on this is that digital has good and bad outcomes. So there's nothing which to suggest that digital is always going to lead to a good outcome, and it's always important to bear that in mind. This is why we have these green outcomes and these red outcomes, and William will talk that strategy is both about the opportunities and managing the risks, right? And digital transformation brings a healthy balance of both.
Certainly, I've got to stand to explain this because I can tell you that we've benefited from generative AI. This would not be possible without the support of 3 generative AI platforms. What we did, we took the framework published in a peer-reviewed journal by Van Older and Van Tienen in 2023. We laid out what is global best practice if you are engaging in digital transformation. And using the platforms, we uploaded a lot of annual reports released to the public, and use the platforms to help us to analyze, interpret, and triangulate the results in terms of a digital score rank from 1 to 5 by industry. So what you see there is the 2024 rank by industry. Now, this is quite dynamic, and I can tell you that we expect that to change. Based on the momentum we're seeing, we expect all industries to improve their scores during this year, 2025. The way to interpret this is not to say what's at top in green is good and what's at the bottom is bad, but to recognize that this refers to the extent to which digital cultures have evolved. So the ones at the top have more or less embedded digital as a philosophy in their culture, while the ones at the bottom are at an early stage. But certainly, this is evolving as more and more industries embrace digital technologies. Now, although this is an overall industry perspective, within each industry, digital varies from company to company. So within each industry, what we've observed is that some companies are further ahead, others are lagging. And we went to the Jamaica Stock Exchange and looked at the reports submitted and did case studies on 2 companies in the same industry. Obviously, because we do not want to influence investor perceptions, we have called the companies Company A and B. But believe me, they are real companies on the stock exchange competing in the same industry. And as you can see, Company B and Company A, red and blue, are both growing in their revenues and both are profitable. However, Company A is growing exponentially, while Company B is growing modestly. And when you look at the return on investment, Company A is enjoying 4 times the return on investment of Company B, although they're in the same industry. So we took a deeper dive into Company A to find out exactly what was happening. We realized that every business model, unless you change it, matures over time. And so what you see on screen are the life cycles of the typical business model. Life cycle X to the left will grow and will mature unless deliberate attempts are made to change it. And if you make the transition, you can go to cycle Y. For Company A, when it was on cycle X, the company focused on local market penetration using product differentiation, facilities expansion, telegram promotion, and of course, basic digital technologies, internet and email as examples. The company realized that local market saturation was a real threat. So it considered how best to go forward and identified export expansion as the way to go. And as many companies in Jamaica realize, exporting is easier said than done. But this company took advantage of digital technologies to drive the transition. The company engaged in digital analytics and, importantly, digital training right through the workforce. The company was able to have several value chain innovations and develop overseas markets. And I want to say a little bit about analytics, because what we have found is that many companies, when they engage in data analytics, do not complete the entire picture. There are generally 5 types, generic types of data analytics. Cognitive analytics, where you identify the issues that are relevant. Then you've got descriptive analytics that tells you what is happening. Diagnostic analytics that tells you why it's happening. And we've found that companies tend to stop at this point and then use brainstorming to go forward. But Company A went further to include predictive analytics to say what might happen, to prepare for what's happening, and predictive analytics, combining scenario planning with benefit cost analysis. So they didn't just approach this part way. They were very deep in analytics, all focused on export expansion. And then the company continued, having got the framework and the networks required for the expansion and the partnerships required. The company started to drive growth with e-commerce, digital marketing, automation, and of course, AI applications. And the results are quite remarkable, because in 2015, the company was doing well in terms of revenues, assets, return on investment. And you would think that because change is said to be disruptive, in trying to make the transition, there'll be some dilution in the performance. This was not the case. The company improved revenue substantially. Assets also went up. And there was even a slight improvement in return on equity. And when the company was fully blown into expansion, improvement continued further. As I've said, the fact is that every cycle matures unless you take steps to correct it. So the company is now not sitting on its laurels. The company is saying, what is the next cycle? And what do we need to do? And if you look at both cycles, you will see that the company has been driving itself with organic growth, pretty much in the same industry. The company has now decided that the next phase is inorganic growth through acquisitions, and is making plans to also drive that with digital. So we're seeing here that even within industries, it's not about only what technologies you use, but how you use the technologies. And as Maurice has said, it's about infusing digital into the culture of the business. Maurice?
Yeah, thanks, William. It's a really interesting story and a really interesting narrative. And I don't want you to lose sight of a couple of things here that William has just done. First of all, is to demonstrate that within the same sector, two businesses that have the same opportunities to access digital technologies, because there's nothing proprietary here, have two very different outcomes. What do you think makes a difference? Well, we know one of them has to be leadership.
That's right.
And so we'll talk about the role of leadership in finding and embracing and executing a digital agenda. The other thing that is interesting here is that this entire story, this entire narrative is not made up. It is based on data from the stock exchange. I think we very often underestimate how valuable the information that the stock exchange publishes on the publicly listed companies and how much that lends itself to analysis. So good work, guys. I just want to follow up that conversation with, there's another case. It's actually a fascinating case, and we use it a lot in the business school. The case of Lego and their digital transformation journey. And if you've never read that case, I would encourage you to do so. First of all, because everybody in the world knows Lego, right? And all of us have, at some point in our childhood, maybe even as adults, have played with Lego blocks. So it is a very familiar story. We might not know that Lego as a company, which started in 1932, a Danish organization, actually went through a near-death experience sometime in the mid-80s. Lego almost died because they could not compete with their traditional toy. It's the #1 toy company in the world. And so they decided to embrace digital as an integral part of their strategy. And to cut a long story short, I encourage you to look at that case. But some of the things that came out of the Lego case are sort of echoing much of what William just spoke about. First of all, their digital transformation journey was done at the very top of the organization. It was driven by executive leadership, not by leaders saying, IT, go figure it out and then come back and tell me what our strategy is. This was driven, conceptualized, and to a large extent overseen by executive leaders. Second thing is, and it's a point we'll come back to, is the fusion between their business strategy and their digital strategy. So it's not the traditional arrangement where of saying, let's go off and plan our business strategy or 5-year strategy, and then say, IT, here it is, go and figure out how you need to support this. This is a fusion of business strategy and digital strategy. The third one, which I've mentioned earlier, is integrating SMART, social, mobile, analytics, and cloud. And remember that, right? So while we're saying leadership is critical, in fact, fundamental, these technologies are still an important part of the agenda. The integration between ITU and the business in terms of broadening ownership of digital innovation, and of course, fundamental, and we heard some of that from the previous presentation, fundamentally shifting the people culture to be flexible, allow people to take risks and to experiment and to iterate towards solutions, right? So a very different approach to how we embrace our talent, the kind of latitude that we give them to get stuff done. And being prepared to fail a little bit, but don't stay with the failure. So it's an important case, and again, it echoes what we've seen from the local cases that and this just, again, summarizes that whole idea of SMAC. I just want to mention one of these. We underestimate mobile as an opportunity, as a strategic opportunity, because we think of mobile as a device. When your people come to you with a digital transformation strategy, ensure that you're not just looking at mobile, you're also looking at mobility, right? And it's an important nuance. Mobility as an attribute of your product and service innovation is critical. And so that allows mobile to be not just a channel for transactions, but a channel for informing, for educating, for analysis, and maintaining this continuity of engagement with your customers. So SMAC, don't forget. And William, that's your cue.
Many companies use the balanced scorecard system, including Company A. And digital, in the case of Company A, augmented and augments its current strategy. The company is pursuing a strategy based on economies of scope, that is certainly a wide product range with small amounts being sold, and that's being driven as product diversification as it goes along. And what the company has done is to go through the typical balanced scorecard planning process, which, as many of you know, involves looking at your external and internal conditions, surveying stakeholders, and from that, developing your SWOT analysis, which gives you your strategic objectives. And then you take that into your scorecard to look at your KPIs, targets, and your initiatives. What you see on screen are your digital technologies, which align with each of the perspectives. So you start by preparing your strategic plan as you normally would. Then you decide how to augment it with specific digital technologies. And here, there's no point taking a me-too approach, because two companies can be in the same industry but have different digital needs. I want to also say that digital technologies take time to yield results, so you should not expect immediate results on day one once you have invested. Also, be aware that you've got to prioritize your initiatives. And here, I recommend a factor rating table, which you can easily download a template. So again, digital here is about augmenting your strategy, making it turbocharged, so to speak. Now, like all investments, digital involves risks. And I see my good friend David Hall in the audience, and he's passionate about this. The fact is that you know that you've got to pay attention to your risk appetite and your risk exposure. If you're looking at digital transformation, it's not only about hazards, not only about downside. You've got to be bold and look at upside risks as well. And that's what Company A did. So, this is just a small sample of the way Company A looked at risks. The top two rows pertain to upside risk, innovation, market expansion. The bottom two, downside, employee resistance, misalignment. And as you can see, the company was able, using the standard template, to get a good handle on what its risk profile is and how it would go about responding to those risks if and when they arise. So what I'm saying is, the way forward with digital is not rocket science, Maurice. You conduct your audits, you review global best practices, you develop your plan, and include in the plan your digital risk management framework. You align your technologies with company strategy, and of course you implement with lean and agile operations. And I must say something about lean practices, because we know a lot of companies offer lean training, and you are inundated oftentimes with a lot of frameworks. It's not as difficult as it looks. Keep it simple, stupid. I'm sure you've heard that. So when it comes to lean and agile, simplicity is the best. But you've got to bear in mind the digital transformation philosophy. Without that, without embedding it in your organization, you could lose members of your team.